What if I told you that seduction has very little to do with romance and everything to do with human nature, that every interaction you've ever had was shaped, at least in part, by invisible psychological forces you didn't consciously choose? Robert Greene doesn't see seduction as manipulation. He sees it as awareness. Awareness of desire, power, fear, and the stories we tell ourselves about why we're drawn to certain people. And once you understand those forces, you can no longer unsee them, especially in yourself. Most people think seduction is about attraction, about saying the right things, wearing the right clothes, or projecting confidence. They assume it's romantic, surface level, even superficial. But that belief itself is evidence of how deeply psychological seduction actually is. Seduction does not begin with beauty or charm, it begins in the mind. It operates beneath conscious awareness, shaping how we interpret signals, attach meaning, and assign value to people long before we realize we've been influenced at all. At its core, seduction is about understanding human psychology, how people feel, what they lack, what they fear, and what they desire but rarely admit out loud. We are not drawn to others randomly. Attraction follows patterns, and those patterns are rooted in emotional needs formed by past experiences, insecurities, and identity. When someone captures our attention, it's rarely because they are objectively impressive. It's because they reflect something back to us: validation, mystery, safety, excitement, or significance. Seduction works when it aligns with those internal pressures. Romance, as it's commonly portrayed, is a story we tell ourselves after the psychological work has already been done. The emotions come first, the narrative comes later. We justify attraction by pointing to traits: intelligence, humor, ambition, but those explanations are often post-rationalizations. The real pull happens earlier, in moments so subtle they feel instinctive. A tone of voice that signals understanding, a pause that creates tension, a sense of being seen without being exposed. These are psychological triggers, not romantic gestures. Robert Greene argues that seduction is about influence, and influence is about perception. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We're constantly interpreting the behavior of others, asking ourselves unconscious questions: am I safe here? Am I valued? Am I interesting in this person's eyes? Seduction answers those questions indirectly. It doesn't force, it invites. It doesn't demand, it suggests. And it works best when the other person believes they arrived at their feelings on their own. This is why seduction is not limited to dating or relationships. It appears in leadership, politics, friendships, branding, and social power. Any situation where attention, loyalty, or emotional investment is involved, seduction is at play. A charismatic leader doesn't seduce through policies alone, they seduce through vision, identity, and emotional resonance. A compelling speaker doesn't rely on facts, they rely on how those facts make the audience feel about themselves. Romance is simply one arena where these psychological dynamics are easier to observe. Understanding seduction as psychology rather than romance also removes the illusion of morality that people attach to it. Seduction is neither inherently good nor evil. It's a tool. Fire can warm a home or burn it down. Psychological influence can inspire growth or enable manipulation. What matters is awareness, both of how seduction is used on others and how it's used on you. Without that awareness, people are vulnerable. They confuse intensity with intimacy, attention with care, and mystery with depth. We are especially susceptible to seduction when we're uncertain about ourselves. When identity is unstable, external validation becomes powerful. Someone who mirrors your values, listens deeply, or seems to understand you effortlessly can feel magnetic, not because they are extraordinary, but because they temporarily resolve inner conflict. That relief feels like connection, and the mind, desperate for coherence, calls it attraction. Seduction also thrives on contrast. Humans habituate quickly. What is predictable fades into the background. What breaks pattern captures focus. This is why subtle unpredictability, emotional, intellectual, or behavioral, can be so compelling. It activates curiosity, which is one of the strongest psychological hooks. Curiosity keeps attention alive. Attention creates emotional investment. Emotional investment deepens attachment. None of this requires romance. It requires understanding how the human brain responds to uncertainty and meaning. When people reduce seduction to romance, they miss the uncomfortable truth: we are far less rational than we believe. We like to think we choose partners logically, that we're immune to influence, that we see through manipulation. But neuroscience and psychology suggest otherwise. Much of our behavior is driven by subconscious processes designed to conserve energy and reduce ambiguity. Seduction exploits those shortcuts, not maliciously by default, but effectively. Recognizing this doesn't make you cynical, it makes you honest. It forces you to confront your own vulnerabilities, why certain people disarm you, why certain dynamics repeat, why you're drawn to what feels familiar, even when it's unhealthy. Seduction reveals patterns, and patterns reveal psychology, ultimately redefining seduction as human psychology strips it of fantasy and replaces it with responsibility. Responsibility to understand your motives. Responsibility to notice when you're being influenced. Responsibility to use influence ethically. Because once you see seduction for what it really is, not romance, not magic, but psychological alignment, you realize it's happening constantly. The only real choice you have is whether you're conscious of it or not. Desire rarely announces itself clearly. Most people believe they know what they want, but what they actually experience are impulses, attractions, and aversions that arise long before conscious thought catches up. Desire is not a simple preference. It is a signal, often pointing towards something missing, unresolved, or suppressed. At its core, desire is shaped by unconscious needs and emotional gaps, spaces within the psyche formed by past experiences, unmet validation, and identity conflicts. From early childhood, humans learn what earns love, attention, and approval. These early lessons don't disappear. They quietly structure adult desire. If affection was inconsistent, desire may gravitate toward unpredictability. If validation was conditional, attraction may form around people who withhold approval. These patterns are not chosen deliberately. They operate below awareness, guiding attraction in ways that feel spontaneous but are deeply conditioned. Desire becomes a psychological echo of earlier emotional environments. This is why people are often drawn to situations that don't objectively serve them. The mind prioritizes familiarity over health. What feels known, even if painful, feels safer than the unknown. Desire, in this sense, is less about pleasure and more about coherence. It seeks to recreate emotional dynamics that the psyche understands, hoping this time the outcome will be different. The pull towards certain people is often an attempt to resolve unfinished emotional business. Emotional gaps intensify desire because they create tension. A person who feels unseen will crave recognition. Someone who doubts their worth will respond powerfully to admiration. Someone lacking direction may be drawn to confidence or certainty in others. These gaps function like open loops in the mind, constantly seeking closure. When another person seems to promise that closure, whether intentionally or not, desire ignites. Importantly, these needs are rarely conscious. People will rationalize desire by pointing to surface-level traits: attractiveness, ambition, intelligence. But those traits matter because of what they symbolize psychologically. Confidence represents safety. Mystery represents depth. Warmth represents acceptance. Desire attaches itself not to the trait, but to the emotional promise behind it. The mind isn't chasing the person. It's chasing the feeling it believes that person will provide. This also explains why desire can be so intense yet so fragile. When attraction is rooted in unmet needs, it depends heavily on projection. The desired person becomes a screen onto which fantasies, hopes, and expectations are projected. As long as the projection remains intact, desire feels powerful. But when reality disrupts the illusion, when the person fails to meet the unconscious expectation, the desire can collapse just as quickly. What was desired was never fully there to begin with. Unconscious desire also distorts perception. It filters information selectively. Red flags are minimized. Contradictions are ignored. The mind protects the object of desire because losing it would mean confronting the underlying emotional gap. In this way, desire can override logic, intuition, and even self-respect. The stronger the unmet need, the more power desire holds over judgment. This dynamic is not limited to romantic attraction. It appears in ambition, status seeking, and identity formation. People desire success not just for comfort, but for validation. They desire recognition not just for achievement, but for reassurance of worth. Emotional gaps fuel many forms of striving. Desire becomes a compensatory mechanism, an attempt to fill internal voids with external symbols. Understanding this doesn't diminish desire, it clarifies it. When people become aware of the emotional roots of their wanting, they gain agency. They can ask better questions. What am I actually seeking here? What feeling do I believe this will give me? Is that feeling something another person can sustainably provide? Awareness creates space between impulse and action, reducing the likelihood of repeating destructive patterns. However, awareness also reveals an uncomfortable truth. Many desires are not about connection, but about repair. They are attempts to soothe old wounds through new relationships. This places an impossible burden on others, turning them into solutions rather than individuals. When desire is driven by emotional gaps, relationships become unstable because the underlying need is endless. No amount of attention, reassurance, or affection can permanently fill an internal void. This is where emotional maturity becomes essential. Mature desire is not driven by lack, but by alignment. It emerges from self-understanding rather than self-avoidance. Instead of seeking someone to complete them, individuals seek resonance, shared values, mutual growth, and emotional reciprocity. Desire becomes less frantic and more grounded. Yet most people oscillate between these states. Moments of clarity alternate with moments of unconscious longing. The human psyche is layered, and progress is rarely linear. But even partial awareness changes the dynamic. It weakens the spell of compulsive attraction and replaces it with discernment. Ultimately, desire reveals more about the one who feels it than the one who receives it. It is a psychological compass pointing toward unresolved needs, hidden fears, and integrated parts of the self. When understood, desire becomes a teacher rather than a trap. When ignored, it quietly governs behavior from the shadows. Recognizing that desire is driven by unconscious needs and emotional gaps is not about suppressing it. It's about understanding what it's really asking for. Attention is one of the most underestimated forces in human interaction. People often think of power in terms of money, authority, or physical dominance, but attention operates on a far more subtle and pervasive level. To give someone your attention is to grant them psychological access. It signals importance, relevance, and value. And because human beings are deeply social creatures, that signal carries immense influence. Attention is not neutral. It shapes behavior, self-perception, and emotional investment. From a psychological perspective, attention is validation. When someone listens to us, looks at us, or responds to us, it confirms our existence within the social world. It tells us that we matter, that our thoughts are worth engaging with. This is why being ignored feels so threatening. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The absence of attention doesn't just hurt emotionally, it destabilizes identity. Power emerges wherever the ability to give or withhold attention exists. This dynamic begins early in life. Children quickly learn that attention is currency. Approval, affection, and recognition shape behavior long before logic or moral reasoning develops. Over time, this conditioning persists. Adults may claim independence, but their nervous systems still respond to the same cues. Praise elevates mood. Silence creates anxiety. Recognition motivates effort. Attention becomes a regulating force, subtly guiding actions and decisions. Because attention is limited, it acquires value. What is scarce is perceived as important. This scarcity effect is central to its power. When attention is given freely and constantly, it loses impact. When it is selective, it gains weight. People become curious about what they don't have access to. They seek explanation, approval, or engagement. This is not manipulation by default. It is how human cognition responds to uncertainty and value cues. In social dynamics, the person who controls attention often controls the emotional tone of the interaction. The one who listens attentively, responds deliberately, or disengages strategically can shape the pace and depth of connection. This is why confident individuals rarely chase attention. Their self-containment makes their attention feel earned rather than automatic. When they give it, it feels meaningful. When they withdraw it, it's felt immediately. Attention also amplifies influence through focus. Whatever receives sustained attention grows in psychological importance. A problem focused on intensifies. A compliment dwelled on strengthens attachment. A person who becomes the object of repeated attention occupies mental space, even in absence. This is how attachment forms, not through grand gestures, but through repeated moments of focused awareness. Attention turns presence into significance. Modern environments have made this dynamic even more pronounced. In a world saturated with information, attention is constantly fragmented. Notifications, feeds, and digital noise compete relentlessly. As a result, genuine attention has become rarer and therefore more valuable. When someone offers undivided attention in a distracted world, it feels intimate, even profound. The act itself communicates care, interest, and depth. This scarcity also creates vulnerability. People starved of attention are more susceptible to influence. They may overvalue minimal engagement, interpreting it as meaningful connection. A delayed response, intermittent reinforcement, or unpredictable availability can trigger obsessive focus. The mind fills in gaps, searching for patterns and meaning. Attention, when inconsistent, becomes addictive. This is not a flaw in character. It's a predictable psychological response. Attention as power becomes especially clear in relationships marked by imbalance. When one person consistently seeks attention and the other controls its flow, a hierarchy forms. The seeker adapts, overthinks, and invests emotionally. The holder remains centered, less reactive. Power doesn't come from cruelty, it comes from asymmetry. The person who needs less attention is less controlled by the interaction. This does not mean attention should be weaponized, but understanding its influence changes how interactions are navigated. It encourages intentionality. Where attention goes, energy follows. Where energy flows, attachment forms. Becoming aware of this allows individuals to protect their attention rather than dispersing it unconsciously. It also allows them to recognize when their emotional state is being shaped by external validation. Attention also influences self-concept. Repeated attention in certain contexts reinforces identity. A person who is consistently noticed for competence begins to see themselves as capable. Someone only noticed for appearance may struggle to feel valued beyond it. Attention doesn't just affect how we feel about others, it affects how we understand ourselves. This makes it one of the most powerful shaping forces in social life. Ultimately, attention is power because it defines what matters. It elevates, sustains, and legitimizes. To give attention is to invest psychologically. To withdraw it is to create absence. Both actions carry weight. Recognizing this doesn't require cynicism, it requires responsibility. Once you understand the power of attention, you become more careful with where you place it and more aware of who is influencing you through it. In a world competing endlessly for focus, attention remains one of the most decisive forces in human psychology. Self-awareness is the dividing line between influence and vulnerability. Most people believe they are making conscious choices in their relationships, attractions, and decisions, but much of human behavior is automatic. Patterns repeat not because people choose them, but because they don't see them. In the context of seduction and influence, this blindness determines who leads the dynamic and who is carried by it. Those who lack self-awareness are more easily pulled by emotional undercurrents they don't recognize. Those who possess it are far harder to move without consent. At its core, self-awareness means recognizing your internal landscape, your desires, insecurities, fears, and motivations as they arise. Without this awareness, emotions feel external, as if they are caused entirely by others. Attraction feels like fate. Discomfort feels like betrayal. Validation feels necessary. When people don't understand their emotional triggers, they interpret their reactions as truths rather than signals. This is where seduction becomes effective. It aligns with unconscious patterns and bypasses rational scrutiny. Someone who is unaware of their need for approval, for example, is easily influenced by attention and praise. Someone unaware of their fear of abandonment is highly sensitive to withdrawal. Someone unaware of their identity uncertainty may attach quickly to confident personalities. In each case, the individual believes they are responding freely, when in reality they are reacting predictably. Seduction works best where self-knowledge is weakest. Self-awareness interrupts this process by creating distance between stimulus and response. Instead of being absorbed by emotion, the individual observes it. Attraction is still felt, but it is questioned. Discomfort is still present, but it is examined. This pause weakens automatic influence. The person no longer confuses intensity with meaning or desire with compatibility. They gain the ability to choose rather than react. This awareness also exposes projection. Much of seduction relies on people projecting qualities onto others: depth, strength, understanding that may not actually exist. When someone is unaware of what they are projecting, they attribute those imagined qualities to the other person and bond to the illusion. Self-aware individuals recognize when their attraction is fueled more by fantasy than reality. They ask, what do I actually know about this person versus what am I assuming? The same principle applies in reverse. Self-aware individuals are conscious of how others may project onto them. They recognize when they are being idealized or misunderstood. This allows them to respond ethically rather than exploitatively. They can clarify, slow down, or set boundaries instead of reinforcing illusions. In this sense, self-awareness is not just a shield, it's a responsibility. Those who lack self-awareness often confuse being seduced with being chosen. They mistake emotional activation for connection. Because they don't understand their own triggers, they interpret strong feelings as evidence of significance. This makes them vulnerable to patterns of manipulation, even when no malice is intended. The influence doesn't come from the other person's intent. It comes from the individual's unexamined inner world. Self-awareness also reshapes how influence is used. People who understand themselves don't rely on unconscious tactics to gain validation. They don't need to provoke jealousy, create scarcity, or perform identities to be valued. Their sense of self is more stable, which makes their presence calmer and more grounded. Ironically, this stability often makes them more attractive, not because they are trying to seduce, but because they are not easily seduced. This dynamic creates a subtle shift in power. Those who are emotionally reactive tend to overinvest, overinterpret, and overexplain. Those who are self-aware remain centered. They don't chase clarity through intensity. They wait for consistency. They are not immune to influence, but they are less controlled by it. Their choices reflect alignment rather than compulsion. Importantly, self-awareness does not eliminate desire or vulnerability. It refines them. It allows individuals to engage deeply without losing themselves. They can experience attraction without surrendering agency. They can open emotionally without abandoning discernment. This balance is rare because it requires ongoing reflection rather than rigid rules. Developing self-awareness is uncomfortable because it challenges identity. It requires confronting patterns that once felt justified. It reveals how often choices were reactions. But this discomfort is the price of freedom. Without it, People remain trapped in loops, attracted to the same dynamics, seduced by the same signals, disappointed by the same outcomes. In the end, the difference between who seduces and who is seduced is not charisma, intelligence, or status. It is awareness. The more unconscious someone is of their inner drivers, the more predictable they become. The more conscious someone becomes, the harder they are to pull off center. Self-awareness doesn't remove power from interactions, it redistributes it inward. And once power is internalized, external influence loses its grip. Mastery is often imagined as control over others, persuasion, charisma, or the ability to shape outcomes through influence. But in reality, mastery begins in a far less visible place. It begins with understanding yourself. Without this foundation, any attempt to influence others is unstable, reactive, and dependent on external validation. True mastery is not about dominance, it is about alignment, and alignment starts internally. Most people move through life responding rather than choosing. Their moods shift based on approval or rejection. Their confidence rises and falls with attention. Their behavior adapts unconsciously to fit the emotional climate around them. This isn't weakness, it's default human functioning. But mastery requires stepping outside this automatic loop. It requires noticing patterns, what triggers insecurity, what provokes defensiveness, what fuels desire, and what causes withdrawal. Until these patterns are recognized, they control behavior from behind the scenes. Self-understanding reveals motivation. People often believe their actions are rational, but motivation is layered. A desire to impress may mask a fear of insignificance. A need to be admired may conceal self-doubt. Ambition may be driven less by passion than by a craving for validation. When these motives remain unconscious, behavior becomes performative, influence becomes compensation, mastery dissolves into effort. Understanding yourself strips away illusion. It forces confrontation with uncomfortable truths, the ways attention alters your mood, the types of people who destabilize you, the situations where you abandon your values to maintain connection. This clarity is not flattering, but it is liberating. Once patterns are seen, they lose their compulsive force. Choice becomes possible. This internal mastery changes how influence is expressed. Rather than seeking power through tactics, individuals operate from presence. They no longer need to provoke reactions to feel significant. They don't rely on scarcity or unpredictability to maintain interest. Their behavior becomes consistent, which paradoxically makes them more compelling. Consistency communicates confidence. Confidence reduces the need for control. Self-mastery also regulates emotion. Instead of suppressing feelings or being overwhelmed by them, individuals learn to interpret emotions as information. Attraction is recognized without obsession. Anger is acknowledged without impulsive action. Anxiety is noticed without avoidance. Emotional regulation doesn't dull intensity, it channels it. This steadiness is rare, and rarity attracts attention without effort. People who lack self-mastery often outsource their sense of worth. They feel powerful when desired and diminished when ignored. This dependency creates vulnerability. Their behavior shifts in pursuit of reassurance, making them easier to influence. In contrast, those who understand themselves generate worth internally. They enjoy attention but are not defined by it. They can walk away from situations that compromise alignment, even if those situations offer validation. Mastery also clarifies boundaries. Without self-knowledge, boundaries feel arbitrary or defensive. With it, boundaries feel natural. They are not erected to control others, but to protect coherence. People with clear boundaries don't need to explain them excessively. They enforce them calmly, which commands respect. Influence follows not from force, but from clarity. Understanding yourself also exposes your shadow, the parts of your personality you avoid or deny, the desire to dominate, to be admired, to feel superior, to be needed. Ignoring these impulses doesn't remove them, it drives them underground. Mastery integrates them. When the shadow is acknowledged, it no longer leaks out unconsciously through manipulation or resentment. Power becomes cleaner, less reactive. This inner work shifts how success is measured. Instead of chasing outcomes, mastery focuses on process. Instead of asking, how do I get them to want me? The question becomes, why do I want this outcome? This reframing reduces desperation. It aligns action with intention. Influence becomes a byproduct rather than a goal. Importantly, self-mastery does not eliminate ambition or desire. It refines them. It separates genuine interest from ego-driven craving. It distinguishes connection from dependency. This discernment prevents self-betrayal. It allows individuals to pursue relationships, goals, and influence without losing integrity. In the long term, mastery creates resilience. External circumstances fluctuate, attention fades, roles change, people leave. Those who rely on external affirmation feel destabilized by these shifts. Those grounded in self-understanding adapt. Their identity is flexible but rooted. They can engage deeply without clinging. Ultimately, mastery is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek recognition. It expresses itself through composure, intentionality, and restraint. Understanding yourself is not a one-time achievement. It's a continuous practice. But every layer of insight reduces unconscious influence and increases agency, and that is where real power begins, not in controlling others, but in no longer being controlled by what you don't understand within yourself. When you strip seduction of its myths and romance, what remains is something far more confronting and far more useful, a mirror. A mirror that reflects how human beings actually think, feel, and respond beneath the surface. Seduction is not an external trick practiced by a few. It is an internal dynamic experienced by everyone. It reveals our psychology, our unmet needs, our hunger for attention, and the stories we tell ourselves to justify desire. At its deepest level, this conversation is not about learning how to influence others. It is about learning how influence already works on us, how unconscious needs shape attraction, how attention quietly becomes power, how lack of self-awareness makes us predictable, and how true mastery begins not with control, but with understanding ourselves. Once these forces are seen clearly, they lose their ability to operate invisibly. This awareness changes how we move through the world. We stop confusing intensity with meaning. We stop mistaking validation for connection. We become more intentional with our attention, more honest about our desires, and more responsible with the influence we hold. Seduction no longer feels like something happening to us. It becomes something we can observe, navigate, and choose. Robert Greene's work is unsettling because it removes comforting illusions, but it is also empowering because when you understand the psychological forces shaping behavior, you gain freedom, freedom from compulsive attraction, freedom from unconscious manipulation, freedom to engage with others from clarity rather than need. In the end, the goal is not to seduce more effectively, but to live more consciously, to recognize the invisible dynamics at play in every interaction, and to decide with intention who you become within them.